Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan-Berge and I'm your host. I am the proud author of 11 books. I have been a CEO for the last 12 years. I am the founder of a startup that looked at disrupting Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, all wrapped under one roof focused on data privacy. And I am an elite performance coach that has looked at over the past 15 going on 20 years injury management in elite athletes, but most significantly my research has uncovered how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, which is mind-blowing. It's incredible, and things I guess that most people thought were not possible, including myself, until the data did the talking. And each episode is going to look at specific snippets in those books, and we're going to pull it apart, pull it out, and break it down to give those little secrets and those snippets about what you might consider doing a little bit differently to give you that edge to help you get inside the top 10, but also and most importantly, stay there. Today's episode, we're going to look at the secrets to optimal performance success. My first book that came out shortly after my doctorate was released. And it is really close to my heart, what we're going to talk about today, and it's probably definitely going to ruffle a couple of feathers. The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success was written in, I guess, the context to give athletes, parents, and coaches the tools to begin with, heading towards the top 10. And when we say heading towards the top 10, it's a long journey. It's essentially a 20-year pathway, which is incredible. And, you know, we can tweak between that 10 to 20 years, but we look at the athlete that picks up, you know, their sport of choice around 10 or before years of age. And you really want the next decade to fine tune that before you're actually, you know, dipping your toes in the world of professional sport. Now, if we're looking at tennis specifically, that's around that 20-year age gap where you're starting to take that deep dive into becoming an elite athlete. You've honed your skills and you're beginning to cross that first threshold. Now, there are countless many thresholds beyond that, and it's transitional to, you know, all the sports out there, whether you're a swimmer, you're a runner, you know, you're a basketball player, netball player, cricket player, it goes beyond. And the key facet there is that it's consistency and it's progress, but it's the preparedness to put in that work. And if, you know, you reflect back to episode 1, it looks at, you know, those relationships formed along the way. So today is, you know, you can follow along with me. We're going to start on page 33 and we're at 1.2. And it has to be, as I shared earlier, one of my favorite topics. And I mean, that's because it's called Hiring and Firing Your Coach, the Right Mix. And I think the title almost says it all, though you can get down, and we will get down to the nitty-gritty behind that. And it's essentially fundamental not only to build the right relationships, but also know when the time comes to say adios. Here we go. A controversial topic by all means, but one that is necessary to address for the well-being of players or athletes and for the parents who become lost in the coach-athlete and coach-parent relationship power tussle. That's a big one. And it's about finding the balance there between the coach and the player or athlete, but also the parent and the coach. Recall that triangle, that relationship, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, and I'll briefly touch on it. So you've obviously got three core people there. Individuals, so you've got the coach, the parent, and the player or athlete. I like interchanging those words because I think most athletes can resonate as an athlete, but in tennis specifically, we look at players, but a lot of sports as well, it's interchangeable. So we want to make sure that, So I think the argument there, well, not necessarily the argument, but something to really be more thought-provoking is centered around why. Why is it so fundamental that relationship's there and that the parents, I guess, that voice of perhaps reason? Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be the parent. It needs to be, hopefully, a close guardian that isn't afraid to talk to the coach as well. But it's also a fine line is drawn between making sure the athlete remains always included and front and center. It's not about building wonderful relationships between the parent or guardian and the coach, and so they become best buddies. No, that's not what it's about. It's about having a healthy dynamic there that is also respected on all fronts. Quite often, I come across parents who are concerned with their child's development and progress. These parents are of the belief, more often than not, that whatever was promised to their child by the coach will somehow happen. But how? They don't know. But they put their trust in this coach because they are good, according to what others have said. There is a heck a lot of good coaches out there. Now, it's fundamental, it's paramount. And I fell victim to this, I guess, in my early days when I was playing. And that's another story. But essentially we're looking at the skills and the qualities of that coach and really doing your, I guess, due diligence in that respect to say, do they have the toolkit? Now, there are a myriad of qualifications out there. There are countless coaches who have been players and then coach, but then you have others who have done the work, they've got that background, that they know what they're doing in respect that they've done the hard yards. And we're not just talking about experience, and we're obviously not just talking about a playing career. We're talking about really understanding the inner workings. Now, each coach serves their purpose, whether they are a former player or they've been a coach their whole life. There's always a purpose for a given coach at a given time. It's being mindful of that relationship, but also your part of the journey you're on. As in, if you're that 10, 12, 13-year-old, what skills are you looking at fine-tuning, and is that coach serving that purpose? There are a lot of wonderful developmental coaches out there. There are a lot of good high-performance coaches out there, but not so many that look at the whole spectrum that can take that developmental phase through to high performance and understand then that elite playing cycle. So it's being conscious of those skill sets and mindful of that, and when the time comes to turn a new page. Good coaches add value to the coaching system. Good coaches represent coaches who are good at what they do, which is predominantly justified by interacting with players. These players appear to have, for the most part, a good time, and these players also get good results. Nothing is wrong with good. Good coaches develop players. However, their expertise traditionally stops at the beginner playing level, and or players who play for social, recreational use and or reasons. The problem with good coaches is that they impose limits on themselves. Now that's probably a rather controversial topic in that respect, and everyone's entitled to how they're going to describe a good coach, an excellent coach, a phenomenal coach, an incredible, and so forth. And I think the fine line here is to be mindful of the purpose that they're serving, and also your purpose. And that is, if you want to learn to play recreationally, if you want to learn the fine skills of the sport, then it's probably relatively easy to find that coach that can get you to that level. When we're looking at the more profound level of play, now this is something incredibly close to my heart because of the misconceptions around this area. It's finding that coach that understands that. Now, I can't tell you how many coaches I have seen developing the athlete that wants to get, to that professional level, and I just see injuries. I see injury, because the knowledge is either not there or they're not being mindful of that. They're looking at how the player looks now. And when I say look, I mean the form or the technique, etc., behind that. And it's not about that. We're looking at progress and steps. We're looking at making sure the right load is placed on the athlete at a given time of their growth phase. A 12-year-old has a different body composition, and when we say that we're looking at, how their body is growing compared to that 18-year-old, that 25-year-old that is able to put an increasing more load on their body compared to 10 years prior. And it's being very mindful of that. And what escapes a lot of good coaches is that knowledge base around that. And you can even look at the other end of the spectrum and go, the researchers and the scientists and the how, right? And go, okay, they understand that space, but then they might not understand how we have to regress backwards and that starting point. And I think that's a wonderful combination. And that's, I guess, where I started in that, that elite playing space, but then also the elite coaching space before dipping my toes into the scientific underpinnings of where we are now. But it's acknowledging that there is a phase and that there is a cycle, and that we need to be mindful of that and respect that, because once you get to that 13, 14, 15 plus years, that is where we know, and the data tells us that you'll stop playing. So many children, athletes, players, they stop playing sport, and a lot of it is correlated with these reasons. And that's behind having a good coach that doesn't put their hand up to say, okay, I need to ask some questions, or okay, we need to move on to that next coach who understands the risks involved here, how we can get to the next level safely, whilst also nurturing your development phase to make sure we're keeping pace with that growth phase and we're not getting ahead of ourselves. Now, you can develop an underlying injury in your early years, in your early adolescent years, that just, slaps you across the face when you're like 18, 19, early 20s, and you go, what happened? Now, we don't have to look too far at elite athletes, around that age bracket of how many of them are actually having surgery. From a scientific and medical perspective, I am gobsmacked. Though at the same time, I'm not surprised, because we know why this happens, but we also know how it's preventable. And it's preventable when we take a step back and we look at the grassroots. We look at the developmental stage and we go, we need to be mindful of the athlete as a whole here. We have to be mindful of that growing phase and how we accommodate loads and training plans to look after the individual. And you know, as an athlete, you might be really stubborn and go, no, I don't want to be looked after. I want results. Give me my results and give me my ranking. And I understand that. That is an athlete mindset and mentality, and I get it. And I hear you. The other end, though, is saying, but do you want to still be an athlete in 10 years' time? Do you want that love you have for your sport to be there still and for it not to rip your heart out? You want it there. You want access there. You still want to be able to perform. And to be able to do that long term, we just need to be cautious in a healthy way, in a mindful way, in those earlier years before we get there. And I think the sad state of affairs is that a lot of coaches are not mindful of that. And if I use tennis as an example, I was only at a centre a few weeks ago and I could see all these wonderful kids playing, all these great players, and you know, they're at a really good level, and this coach is telling me, oh, look how good they are, and I'm looking at them going, just those injuries are there. Just give them 1-2 more years and there's an injury. We've got kids that they've got players there that are, 10, 8, 9. No, I got to stop playing for a few weeks because I've injured my wrist. Oh, there's another one. I need to stop playing because, I've had this injury on my ankle and I still want to play on it, but no, it hurts. And we're going to take just a little bit of a detour here by saying, and I walked up to one of the coaches and I said, look, I think this one, it just needs to rest for a little bit, just to put him off. And this is what comes back to the good coach is, no, it's okay. We know about it, but he wants to keep playing. And that is, I just threw my hands up. And I'm saying this or sharing this because that athlete, we know that career is no. It's heartbreaking. And if you don't look after an injury when it happens, especially in those earlier years, it's going to linger. You need to look after it. And it's so serious in respect to having that professional career. If that's the end point, if that's what you're shooting for, you need to look after your body as a whole. And good coaches serve a purpose, but if that red flag comes up, and this is a red flag, it's time to walk away and to find that coach that is essentially mindful of your well-being as a whole. These limits are set in place by these coaches, being comfortable with working with beginner players and social and or recreational players, and there is nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all. These coaches are good at what they do, and the coaching profession needs them. And that's really important. Despite what has been shared, obviously they're being mindful. Thank you. It's about teaching the fundamentals, because we all start playing sport because we love it. We have so much fun, and that should be a constant. We never want the fun and the enjoyment taken away from us. Yeah, there are also good coaches at the elite level that aren't necessarily good at the developmental stage. Every coach has something unique to offer. It is up to the player and parent to find the right fit and for the coach to foster the most optimal coach-athlete relationship that contributes towards successful performance outcomes. Now that's a big one that I guess goes back to the discussion from good and that they serve their premise, but also the elite coaches that don't necessarily have those skill sets for the developmental stage. Now, it essentially means that if you're looking at becoming a professional athlete, you're going to have more than one coach throughout your playing career. Now, you could have one that is a constant throughout those early adolescent years or prior that stays with you throughout. And that's probably very common for the athletes and players out there who have parents by their sides. But, you do have the rare occasion where you have a coach that is there throughout that 20 plus year cycle, which is incredible. Though rarely, incredibly rare, if not ever, I would go as far as saying that they don't get guidance or there's not a secondary coach. More often than not, and I'm saying 99.9% of the time, there will be that secondary coach that comes in to share the key insights at that level of play, whether that is for the good player at the developmental stage, fine-tuning those skills, the player that's developing towards a more high-performing player, and they have more, say, technical insights coming into the team before they progress towards the more professional level of play, and they have that good coach accommodating them as well. Though it is relatively rare to have a coach that is mindful of the entire playing cycle, but it's also incredibly important to be conscious of the skill level of your coach that you have, and when again the time comes to move on to the next. Good coaches without the right intent and optimally established coach-athlete relationship can become problematic. Problems begin to arise when these good coaches begin to step outside their area of expertise and can then do their players more harm than good. And that is incredibly fundamental. It's integral to be mindful of as an athlete, but also as a parent. And it's also incredibly important for the coaches out there to be mindful of when the time comes to allow your player or athlete to move on to their next chapter. And that is essentially what forms an incredibly healthy coach-athlete relationship. It's that open dialogue and the discussions around, this is how far we're going to get together before you move on. Or we're going to go this whole way together, ideally, if you have an incredible coach-athlete relationship that's looked after. But this is also the intervals where we're going to introduce a secondary coach or even a third into the mix to help through these stages of progression. These coaches, although good at what they do, can at times hold onto their players because they have developed a good coach-athlete relationship. Whether this relationship has stemmed over several months or years, these coaches do not want to lose this player. They want to hold on to them and keep them as part of their coaching family. Now, this isn't to say it's a bad thing. It's a wonderful, thing in respect that you've been able to establish a wonderful bond. It means you have a very healthy and respectful coach-athlete relationship, just a wonderful, healthy dynamic. But you need to keep front and center the end goal, what your key objective is. And if your key objective is to become a professional athlete or professional tennis player and you want those ranking points, you want to break into the top 500, 100, top 50, top 20, top 10, you're going to have to be able to make those changes, to be mindful of that. And if we recall back to episode 1 about being able to know, I guess, if everyone on the team has their coaching pedagogy, so their central point of focus on the same key objective. And when the time comes to go, okay, we acknowledge this, and now this is where we need to make that transition. Holding on to these family members is not in the best interest of the player or athlete if your limits have been reached and your area of expertise can no longer help this player reach their performance objectives. It is time to hire a new coach when these limitations are met or observed. It is the responsibility of the coach to be aware of this and to let the player or athlete know that they are no longer in the best position to help the player-athlete reach their performance objectives. Now, for a coach to be able to share this, that's when you know you have a remarkable coach. Even if they're a good coach, they are still remarkable for being able to serve their purpose, being able to be honest with you and to say, all right, this is the time and this is the moment where we're going to move on. That's wonderful. It doesn't mean you're parting ways in all senses. You can still have that relationship there, and maybe they're that voice of reason, and they're also, I get, a mentor in a lot of respects. You're still allowed to move on. It means that your endpoint, your goal, has been acknowledged by your coach, and you've done the right thing. All three of you on that team, it could be more, but three in specific too, we're looking player, athlete, but coach and parent, have acknowledged, okay, the time is now. Of course, this is only applicable if the player is not a social and or recreational player. This type of situation can be extremely difficult for the coach to come to terms with if they are not truly aware of the developmental process. Unfortunately, a lot of coaches are in this position due to the education system. Now, we're going to finish on that note because it's such a significant and paramount topic when we're looking at coach education, and oftentimes it is naivety of not being aware of the new practices out there, the new methods, what the science says, the developmental cycle, the elite playing cycle, and so forth, and everything that falls in between. I, for one, know that so many coaches out there, they do not have access to this. But that also includes the federations responsible for that education. It's constantly about upskilling. And if you're talking to one of the scientists out there that are responsible for developing this incredible research on how we can push those boundaries whilst also putting the athlete front and center, I mean, education, it's front and center. That's the key about being able to inform the next generation to upskill and to move the marker. And I think that's been the fundamental part, personally and professionally, of why I took that decision to make my research accessible and available in these publications, in these books, to make sure these guides were able to, be slipped into your back pocket essentially and guide you. It's like book 1, bam, book 2, bam, and so on and so forth. And I mean, I've been obviously incredibly fortunate to be able to pop out 11 today. But we're going to wrap this episode up on the pretense of, really honing in on that education. And that doesn't mean that you need to stop. It means, hey, we're here and you're listening to Beyond Top 10 Tennis for a reason, right? And the secrets to optimal performance success is just one tool to have with you where you go, and you can take control of your education in that respect to be more aware and conscious of these levels of play. Whether you are that parent, you are the coach, or you are that player or athlete wanting to progress towards potentially becoming a professional athlete and then moving closer to that top 100, top 50, and eventually top 10. The tools are there, the research is there, the markers, the data is there, and it gets me very excited. Though we have to start somewhere, and it's a fundamental topic that we're going to cover in the weeks to come. AIMAinternational.com has all of the resources. If you've got any comments or questions on this episode, email the links that are in the podcast or on the website, and I will be pretty excited to be able to include that in future episodes. And we're going to wrap today up. So thank you so much for listening, and I will be back next time to talk more about the secrets to optimal performance success, but also most integral beyond the top 10 tennis. I'm so grateful. Thank you for listening. I am your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and I will see you next time.